You're standing in a clearing south of Da Nang, 1967. Your boots sink into mud that smells like rot and copper. Around you, your platoon fans out, M16s raised, eyes scanning tree 50 meters away. You've been in country for 3 months. You've seen firefights, watched friends medevaced out with sucking chest wounds. You think you understand this war. Then your point man takes a step. The bamboo beneath his foot doesn't break. It pivots. A pole, thick as your wrist, whips from the jungle at 100 miles per hour. Foot-long spikes, some tipped with rusted metal, some smeared with human shit, slam into his chest and neck. He's dead before he hits the ground. You drop to your belly. Standard training. But the man next to you, trying to help, steps backward. The earth opens. He falls 6 feet into a pit lined with sharpened stakes angled downward. When he tries to pull his legs out, the stakes tear deeper. His screaming brings 2 more men running. One steps on a cartridge trap buried in the trail. A single 7.62 millimeters round fires through the sole of his boot, through his foot, into his shin. The bone shatters. In 90 seconds, without a single enemy soldier visible, your patrol has 4 casualties. This is Vietnam. And what the Viet Cong did to American units wasn't random violence. It was systematic psychological warfare built on tactics so effective, so brutally efficient, that they turned the world's most powerful military into an army that had to check every footstep, every shadow, every breath of wind through the bamboo. If you're the kind of person who thinks documented military history matters more than comfortable myths about American invincibility, you're in the right place. What I'm about to show you isn't just about booby traps and tunnels. It's about how 50,000 guerrilla fighters defeated 500,000 American troops by understanding something the Pentagon never grasped. You can't kill an enemy you can't see. And you can't win a war when every step might be your last. According to Australian Ministry of Defence statistics, 11% of all American deaths and 15% of all wounds in Vietnam came from booby traps and mines. That's 45,000 men wounded by devices that cost pennies to make. Punji sticks alone, sharpened bamboo stakes often smeared with toxins, accounted for 2% of American casualties. But here's what makes it worse. The Viet Cong didn't just maim soldiers. They weaponized fear itself. Picture this. You're on patrol. Every step could trigger a trap. The grass in front of you looks wrong. The rock to your left wasn't there yesterday. That tree branch hanging low, the one that looks natural, it's been moved. You know it. You feel it. But you have to keep walking. A U.S. Army report noted that the psychological effect was as important as the physical damage. Just knowing a mine or booby trap could be anywhere slowed combat operations and forced Allied troops to clear almost the entire Vietnam road net every day. Think about what that does to a 19-year-old kid from Ohio. He's not fighting soldiers. He's fighting dirt. He's fighting air. He's fighting the moment between lifting his foot and putting it down. And the truly evil genius? Most Viet Cong booby traps were made from bamboo, so mine detectors couldn't locate them. American technology, billions of dollars in equipment, rendered useless by a material that grows everywhere. But the traps were just the surface. The real horror was underneath. 1966, Operation Crimp. Binh Duong Province, just northwest of Saigon. 8,000 American and Australian troops sweep an area suspected of harboring Viet Cong. They expect bunkers, maybe a few supply caches. What they find instead stops them cold. An Australian specialist engineering troop ventures into the tunnels and searches exhaustively for 4 days, finding ammunition, radio equipment, medical supplies, food, and signs of considerable Viet Cong presence. One of their number, Corporal Robert Baudel, dies when he becomes trapped in a tunnel that turned out to be a dead end. After their discoveries, Captain Alexander McGregor receives a military cross and refers to his men as tunnel ferrets. But an American journalist coins the term that sticks, tunnel rats. Because that's what the volunteers who went down there became. Rats crawling through the earth, hunting an enemy that lived beneath their feet. The Siu Chi tunnels were part of a massive network stretching 75 miles, connecting underground villages with living quarters, kitchens, ordnance factories, hospitals, and bomb shelters. Some sections had theaters and music halls. The Viet Cong had built an entire civilization underground, and nobody knew. Let me show you what it was like down there. You're 5 feet 6 inches, 130 pounds. One of the few soldiers small enough to fit. They hand you a flashlight and a .45 pistol. That's it. No rifle, no grenades, no backup. The tunnel entrance is 18 inches wide, hidden under a cooking pot in a village hut. You lower yourself in. The walls are clay, packed hard by years of bodies brushing past. The air tastes like mold and sweat and something else. Something chemical. Your flashlight beam shows the tunnel stretching 10 feet ahead before turning sharply left. You crawl forward. Then the light catches something. Trip wire. Invisible unless you're looking for it. Connected to a grenade with the pin already pulled, held in place by a bamboo stake. One wrong move, and the tunnel becomes your grave. The tunnels were engineered to be a nightmare for infiltrators. They were booby-trapped with spikes, grenades, poison gases, trapdoors and snakes, and certain sections could be flooded with water. And if the traps don't get you, the darkness does. Tunnel rat Harold Roper recalled, "I felt more fear than I've ever come close to feeling before or since." There were only around 100 army tunnel rats in Vietnam, and most either died in the tunnels or in ambushes on the surface. But they kept going down, because someone had to. The tunnel rats built a special culture, ensuring that no rat, wounded or dead, was ever left inside a tunnel. When one of their number was injured, the rats used 300 pounds of C4 to blow the top off of a tunnel system. That's the bond formed by men who crawl through hell together. And what did they find? According to a former Viet Cong officer, the tunnel rats eliminated over 12,000 guerrillas and captured many more. During one operation in August 1968, the rats killed 3 Viet Cong but captured 153 more. One underground complex covered 2,000 meters and yielded cameras, films, printing presses, and type, in addition to weapons and ammunition. One tunnel, rat even stumbled across a missing M48 tank the Viet Cong were using as a command center. A tank, underground, hidden so well that American forces didn't know it existed until they literally crawled into it in the dark. That's the enemy they were fighting, an enemy that could make a 50-ton vehicle disappear into the earth. But the tunnels weren't just hiding places. They were launch pads. And what the Viet Cong did with them, the way they used them to hit American units and vanish like smoke, that's where the real terror begins. Because every time American forces thought they'd cleared an area, every time they declared a zone secure, the Viet Cong would emerge from beneath their feet and prove them wrong. March 28, 1971. Firebase Mary and 2:30 a.m. Specialist Dennis Schultz had just left the Tactical Operations Center. He'd been talking with friends about going home. Normal conversation. Normal night. The firebase had been quiet for months. 13 months without a serious ground probe. The guys were getting short, counting days until the Freedom Bird took them back to the world. 10 minutes later, the sky caught fire. Hundreds of mortar shells arced down out of the moonless sky with uncanny accuracy. Hunkered down in their bunkers, the GIs never even saw the 50 or so North Vietnamese sappers who slipped through the perimeter wire, wearing nothing but shorts, black grease, and strings of rocket-propelled grenades. Nothing but shorts. Think about that. No uniforms, no boots, no helmets. Just skin covered in charcoal and grease. Because metal reflects moonlight. Fabric rustles. Boots leave prints. But skin covered in ash becomes invisible in darkness. Becomes nothing. Becomes death moving at 20 feet per second through wire that should have stopped them. The Americans called them sappers. The Vietnamese called them Viet Cong Special Task Soldiers. But those translations don't capture what they really were. They were surgical instruments wielded by an army that understood something profound about warfare. You don't win by being stronger. You win by being smarter. In military usage, the term originally applied to French soldiers who dug narrow trenches toward an enemy fort. In Vietnam, however, American troops used the name primarily for North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong units that broke through defensive lines using tactics more akin to raids by commandos. These weren't engineers. They were ghosts with satchel charges. They strapped weapons and explosive charges to their bodies to minimize noise as they maneuvered through the outer band of fortifications, and often covered their bodies in charcoal and grease to aid movement and make detection more difficult. But Firebase Mary and was supposed to be secure. 231 American soldiers, 22 bunkers, concertina wire, artillery. The firebase stretched 500 meters across 2 bulldozed hilltops. It looked like a fortress. It was a coffin. The company CP and battalion TOC had been the primary targets for the brilliantly executed sapper assault, and night was one of 30 Americans killed. On the morning of March 28th, Doyle and Spielberg were among the 82 wounded GIs evacuated. 30 dead, 82 wounded, in 45 minutes. It was the most deadly attack on a single U.S. firebase during the Vietnam War. But here's what makes it worse. Here's what the after-action reports buried, what the Pentagon didn't want America to know. The 50 sappers slipped through the base's barbed wire without alerting a single sentry. Not one. Not a single guard saw them coming. Not a single alarm sounded until the first satchel charge detonated inside the command bunker. How? Because the sappers had already been inside the firebase. Multiple times. For weeks. The sapper's principal weapon is patient, detailed reconnaissance. The satchel charge and the vital element of surprise follow once he knows all about your defenses. Reconnaissance was essential for success. Without a thorough knowledge of the target area, the sapper will not attack. During the reconnaissance phase, every detail must be noted: the location of mines, booby traps and fighting positions, the number of guards, their habits and exact locations, routes to the targets and routes of withdrawal. They watched. They learned patterns. Which guards smoked on duty? Which bunkers had the laziest sentries? Where the trip flares were positioned? Where the wire had weak points? They came at night, crawled through the perimeter, observed, and left without a sound. Sometimes they'd move a rock, adjust a stake, test the wire tension. Small changes that nobody noticed. Then they built replicas. Sappers built mock-ups of each base they targeted and rehearsed every mission down to the tiniest detail. Each sapper knew exactly what he was supposed to do in the mission. In jungle camps miles away, they reconstructed Firebase Mary, and from memory. Same layout, same bunker positions, same wire configuration. They practiced the assault over and over, blindfolded, in darkness, until every man could navigate the base by touch alone. The attack wasn't improvised. It was choreographed. The Vietnamese called this type of combat the blooming lotus tactic, penetrating a fortified area and assaulting outward. Beautiful name for something horrific. The lotus blooms from mud. The sappers emerged from darkness. Captain Paul Spielberg was running down the hallway of the Battalion Tactical Operations Center when he hit the tear gas. Staggering blindly back the way he had come, Spielberg made it to the north exit, crawled up the stairs and out the door into the fresh but bullet-ridden air. Forcing his eyes to focus, the shaken captain was stunned to hear the fire of AK-47s and the crash of rocket-propelled grenades from inside the base's perimeter. In amazement, he watched as numerous small figures darted cat-like among the spreading flames. Cat-like. That's the word he used. Not human. Cat-like. Because that's what they looked like moving through the base. Fluid, impossible, like physics didn't apply to them. For 45 minutes, the infiltrators sprinted throughout the firebase, expertly planting their charges among the frantic, befuddled Americans. Frantic. Befuddled. Those are devastating words in a military report, because they mean the soldiers didn't know what was happening, couldn't organize, couldn't respond, just died confused. Captain Richard Knight, company commander, never made it out of his command post. As Spielberg reached the crumbling entrance, he could hear ammunition exploding in the flames. He peered inside, but saw only a blazing vision of hell. Somewhere within that inferno, Knight lay dead. But the truly damning detail? Of the 28 South Vietnamese troops in the base, only one was wounded. The American survivors pointed out that the South Vietnamese positions were not hit, and that the ARVN troops had made no attempt to help the embattled GIs. The ARVN soldiers knew. Maybe they'd been bribed. Maybe threatened. Maybe they'd just seen which way the wind was blowing and decided to survive. Either way, they stayed in their bunkers while Americans burned. Following the sapper assault, U.S. forces recovered 15 enemy bodies from within the perimeter, with blood trails and drag marks extending into the surrounding jungle, indicating that surviving Viet Cong systematically evacuated additional dead and wounded comrades during their withdrawal. 15 bodies. That's all they left behind. Even under fire, even wounded, the sappers carried their dead out. Because that's discipline. That's what separates professionals from amateurs. Amateurs abandon their wounded. Professionals bring them home. And here's where the story gets even darker. The official report devastatingly concluded that the NVA had simply outperformed their opponents, that leadership at Mary and had been slipshod and unprofessional, and that most American casualties could have been avoided had soldiers behaved like soldiers. Translation: the sappers won because the Americans had stopped being an army. By 1971, Vietnam had broken the U.S. military. Drugs were rampant. Racial tensions were exploding. Officers were being fragged, killed by their own men. 6 high-ranking field grade and flag officers, up to and including the division's commanding general, were relieved of duty and officially reprimanded following the shitstorm of March 28, 1971. It hastened the pullout of U.S. troops and sounded the sorry endnote for the Americol division. The same division responsible for my lie. Now responsible for this. 2 bookends of failure. But Firebase Mary and wasn't unique. It was the pattern. On November 1, 1968, a successful raid involving swimmer sappers severely damaged the USS Westchester County, seeing the U.S. Navy's greatest single-incident combat loss of life during the entire Vietnam War. While the ship was docked at My Tho, sappers carrying 2 250 kilograms mines swam up and planted them on the lower hull, detonating them. Consequently, 25 sailors were killed and another 27 wounded. Swimmer sappers. They didn't just infiltrate on land. They swam through harbors, breathing through reeds, carrying mines strapped to their chests, and attached them to American warships while sailors slept above. Such attacks were highly effective, with 88 successful attacks between 1962 and 1969 killing 210 personnel and wounding another 325 in return for only 20 sappers killed or captured. Read that ratio again. 210 killed, 325 wounded, for the loss of 20 attackers. That's not warfare. That's surgery. And the training that created these men? Official People's Army of Vietnam military publications revealed that during the period from the 1970s through the early 1990s, PAVN sappers covertly provided specialized commando training to foreign forces at the PAVN Sapper Training School in Vietnam, by Vietnamese sapper advisors assigned to the Cuban Army Sapper School in Cuba, and by a secret Vietnamese sapper training team stationed in Nicaragua. The tactics were so effective that after Vietnam, the communists exported them. Trained guerrillas in El Salvador, Chile, Colombia. The blueprint survived the war. But standing on Firebase Mary and that morning, watching bodies being loaded into medevac helicopters, watching the TOC still burning, nobody was thinking about tactics or training. They were thinking about one thing. How do you fight an enemy you never see coming? Captain Paul Walker, the information officer, ended his after-action report this way. Charlie had been repelled, but not by a combat infantry force. He had been stopped by cooks, supply personnel, mechanics, clerks, and courage. Yes, by raw courage. Raw courage. Against an enemy that had been practicing the attack for months. Against men who moved like shadows and struck like lightning. The Americans called it a victory because they survived. The Vietnamese called it a success because they'd achieved their objective. Prove that no American firebase, no matter how fortified, was safe. And they were right. Because after Mary and every soldier on every firebase in Vietnam started checking the wire more carefully. Started listening for sounds that shouldn't be there. Started sleeping lighter. Started understanding that in this war, the night didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to Charlie. August 6, 1970. 10 a.m. Somewhere in the jungle near Chu Lai. 20-year-old Gordon Wise from Minneapolis was walking point for his platoon. Standard patrol. Another day of sweating through elephant grass, checking tree leans, moving through terrain that all looked the same. His boot came down on packed earth that looked like every other square foot of ground he'd stepped on that morning. The mine was a pressure release type. Easy to hide. Impossible to spot. From his hospital bed 5 days later, Gordon dictated a letter home. Assumed you've heard what happened to me. To make matters short, I was walking point for my platoon on the 6th of August, somewhere around 10 in the morning. I hit a booby trap. It was a pressure release type mine, therefore it was easily camouflaged and rough to spot. I lost most of my left leg and my left hand. I'll write when I have the chance. He died 2 days later, 20 years old, killed by a device that cost less than $1 to make. The first U.S. soldier to die in battle in Vietnam was killed by an anti-personnel mine, and an Army mine awareness pamphlet distributed to troops reminded them. Mines and booby traps have been employed so often and effectively by the Viet Cong that the war has often been referred to as the War of Mines and Booby Traps. Not the war against communism, not the war for democracy, the War of Mines and Booby Traps. That's how soldiers experienced it, and the numbers prove them right. Speaking in front of the House Armed Services Committee in April 1971, General Gribble, the Army's chief of research and development, stated that approximately 25% of casualties in 1968 came from mines and booby traps. But other sources paint an even grimmer picture. During a congressional hearing in February 1972, a New Yorker article by Seymour Hersh was quoted claiming that more than 90% of the AmeriCorps Division's combat injuries and deaths in early 1968 resulted from Viet Cong booby traps and land mines. 90%. Not from firefights. Not from battles. From the ground itself turning deadly. Between 65% and 75% of all U.S. casualties in the first few months of 1965 resulted from mines and booby traps. Over 300,000 Americans were wounded in Vietnam. That means roughly 45,000 men were maimed or killed by devices they never saw coming. And here's the truly evil genius of it. The Pentagon had conceded, at least internally, that the mine problem stemmed from the U.S. military's own unstable supply lines. The enemy uses a very limited number of factory-produced Soviet and Chinese communist mines. The majority are fabricated locally in village or district munition factories from U.S. duds and refuse. 90% of all mine and booby trap components are U.S. origin. America was being killed by its own weapons. Unexploded bombs, discarded ammunition, abandoned equipment. The Viet Cong turned American firepower against American soldiers, and it cost them almost nothing. Up to 90% of explosive traps used repurposed ordnance left by American troops. As in Korea, the Pentagon's decision to flood a war zone with anti-personnel mines led to a devastating blowback effect that cost many U.S. lives. But the physical casualties were only half the damage. The real destruction was psychological. Colonel David Hackworth, one of the most decorated officers in Vietnam, described it like this. The impact on the soldier was a psychological impact, that every time you put your foot down, you didn't know whether you were going to have a leg, or a limb, or a life. And this played over for 365 days of going down trails, going down waterways. It took the fight out of you. 365 days. That's how long a tour lasted. 365 days of checking every footstep. 365 days of knowing that the grass in front of you, the rock to your left, the tree branch overhead, any of them could kill you. 365 days of watching friends step on mines and understanding there was nothing random about who lived and who died. Just luck. Just where you happened to put your boot down. Hackworth took over a battalion in the Delta that had had 600 casualties in 6 months, all from mines and booby traps. The battalion had never met the enemy. It was all from these devices. 600 men. Never fired a shot in combat. Just walked through the wrong patch of ground. And the psychological toll? Hackworth recalled. Months after I left Vietnam, I found myself walking across an open field, and I suddenly said, "Where am I?" and froze. Back home. Safe. Walking through an American field. And his body still expected the ground to explode. That's what the booby traps did. They didn't just maim bodies. They broke minds. It's one thing to enter a battle that's already raging. A soldier knows danger is present. Walking through the woods with no enemy for miles around on a nice quiet day. Then suddenly getting your leg blown off? Psychologically terrifying. The Viet Cong understood this. Many traps were designed to maim instead of kill. Not only because this meant other soldiers were required to remove their wounded colleagues, which hampered operations, but because the traps were a psychological weapon as word about them spread. A dead soldier is 1 casualty. A wounded soldier screaming on the ground is 3 casualties. The wounded man, the 2 men who have to carry him out, and every other soldier who hears him screaming and knows it could be them next. And the Viet Cong made it worse with secondary traps. They frequently used secondary booby traps, so as soldiers rushed in to help injured colleagues, a delayed secondary charge would go off. Your friend steps on a mine. You run to help. The trap beside him, the one designed specifically for rescuers, kills you both. In Vietnam, it was known that the standard technique was to hit the first guy, then take out anybody going after him. That was how they would add to their casualty list. They turned compassion into a weapon, made helping your wounded brothers a death sentence. The variety of traps was staggering, each one designed for maximum physical and psychological damage. Punji sticks, sharpened bamboo stakes of various length and width, often smeared with urine, feces, or plant poison to also cause infection. They were often jammed into camouflaged pits dug in areas likely to be passed through by American troops. Sometimes the sticks pointed downwards at an angle, with soldiers stepping into a pit unable to remove their leg without causing further damage. Occasionally, the Viet Cong would dig pits beside each other, so when a soldier fell in and needed help, his colleague would then get trapped in the pit next door. You fall into a hole filled with spikes covered in shit. You're screaming. Your buddy tries to help. He falls into the hole right next to you. Now you're both dying of infected wounds, and there's nobody left to pull you out. Bamboo whip traps. A bamboo pole attached to a tripwire and pulled back with tension. The pole had foot-long spikes attached to it, so when the tripwire was triggered, whoever tripped it would be impaled by the spikes as the pole whipped forward at up to 100 miles per hour. 100 miles per hour. That's the speed of the bamboo striking your chest. Spikes, sometimes poisoned, sometimes just rusted, punching through ribs and lung tissue before you even register what happened. Cartridge traps. Small arms cartridges placed within a bamboo tube over a nail, then camouflaged in the ground with the tip protruding. When stepped on, the pressure forced the bullet down onto the nail, igniting the primer and exploding. One bullet, fired straight up through the sole of your boot, through your foot, into your shin. The bone shatters. You're done. And the trap cost maybe 10 cents to make. Grenade traps. Grenades were used inside cans fastened to the ground and connected by wire. The grenade's pins had been pulled before being inserted, with the safety lever held down. When the tripwire was triggered, the grenades were pulled from the cans, releasing the safety levers. You walk between two trees. A wire you can't see pulls grenades from cans you didn't know were there. You have maybe 3 seconds to understand you're about to die. And the Viet Cong weaponized America's own habits. They booby-trapped flags, knowing U.S. troops like to capture them as war trophies. When forced to leave a location, they rigged the flags with explosives, so when U.S. soldiers took them down, the traps would detonate. You see an enemy flag. Pride swells. You reach for it. Your hand is the last thing you see intact. For lighters, the VC would place explosives in the fuel compartment. They'd wet the wick with flammable liquid, and when the unsuspecting troop lit a cigarette, it would blow up in his face. For cigarette packs, they painted metal containers to look ordinary, filled them with explosives and ball bearings, then poured acid into the top, which ate through a delay membrane, detonating the main charge. You pick up a cigarette pack. You put it in your pocket. For hours later, acid burns through the fuse, and ball bearings shred your leg. Even bridges became death traps. The Viet Cong would partially saw bridges in the middle to make them structurally weak, then place mud over the cut to hide it. Beneath the bridge, they'd lay iron spikes or sharpen bamboo stakes. They often dammed up the stream to obscure what lay beneath. You cross a bridge you've crossed a dozen times before. It breaks. You fall. Stakes impale you in water you can't see through. You drown slowly, pinned underwater, while your friends watch from above and can't reach you. But here's what American commanders couldn't accept. In a July 1969 letter to the Army's Chief of Research and Development, the Deputy Commanding General in Vietnam wrote, "Our experience in Vietnam with mines and booby traps has not been pleasant. Mining incidents are a major source of personnel casualties. The hardware available to detect mines or booby traps has been of limited value. Mine detectors are unacceptably slow or practically useless, particularly when operating against non-metallic mines. Billions of dollars in equipment. Useless, because the bamboo used to construct many traps didn't register on mine detectors." The letter continued, "The increasing use of non-metallic mines, both homemade and factory-produced items, has essentially thrown us back upon visual means as the primary mode of detection. The lessons we have learned here in Vietnam should not be interpreted as an isolated problem peculiar to this war only. Visual detection. In jungles so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Against traps designed by people who'd lived in that jungle their entire lives." Hackworth explained why his men stayed in the water. "You could expect that any dry surface was mined and booby-trapped. And 60% of all the casualties we had in Vietnam came from mines and booby traps laid, I might add, by those local guerrillas who the generals at the top didn't count. The generals didn't count local guerrillas, didn't consider them real threats. They were looking for divisions, battalions, conventional forces. Meanwhile, farmers and teenagers were planting devices that killed more Americans than any NVA regiment. And the traps served another purpose beyond casualties. They controlled territory." Hackworth said, "The guerrilla is the fish and the people are the water. If you want to kill the fish, you remove the water. If you want to kill the gorilla, you remove the people because they provide all kinds of assistance. Medical help, agricultural help, they put out the booby traps, they provide the intelligence, they provide the trail watchers. They are the whole sea in which the gorilla fish swims. Old women planting punji sticks. Children burying cartridge traps. Farmers rigging grenades to tree branches. The entire population became the weapon. And American soldiers couldn't tell who was dangerous and who wasn't until they were already bleeding out. Casualties from mines and booby traps were widely referred to as a direct causal factor in the My Lai massacre by soldiers of the 23rd American Infantry Division in March 1968. Men watching their friends die invisible deaths, killed by villagers who smiled at them during the day and planted mines at night. The rage had to go somewhere. And when it did, it turned a patrol into a war crime that would haunt America for generations. But some units tried to adapt. They developed tactics. In February 1970, the 25th Infantry Division reported that division soldiers destroyed 230 mines and booby traps while detonating 96, resulting in 11 U.S. soldiers killed and 101 wounded. In March 1970, they destroyed 240 mines and booby traps while detonating 72, resulting in 8 killed and 106 wounded. They were getting better, finding more traps. But the casualties kept coming, because you don't have to find every trap. You just have to miss one. And the Viet Cong kept innovating, kept adapting, kept finding new ways to turn American soldiers' own instincts against them. A common trick was to provide victims with a simple solution to a problem. For example, leaving only one door open in an otherwise secure building, luring them straight toward the firing mechanism. An example that exploited an instinct for self-preservation was used in the Vietnam War. Spikes known as punji sticks were hidden in grassy areas. When fired upon, soldiers instinctively sought to take cover by throwing themselves down on the ground, impaling themselves on the spikes. Under fire, you dive for cover. The cover kills you. That's not warfare. That's psychological torture elevated to strategic doctrine. And it worked. By 1970, American soldiers weren't sweeping through villages anymore. They were creeping, checking every inch of ground, jumping at shadows, treating every rock and leaf as a potential bomb. The Viet Cong had turned the fastest, most technologically advanced military in history into an army that moved at the speed of paranoia. But the traps and tunnels were just tactics. The real question was strategic. How do you defeat an enemy that won't fight you directly? How do you win a war where victory looks like controlling ground during the day and surrendering it every night? The answer America came up with would define the final, desperate years of the war. And it would fail for reasons nobody in Washington wanted to admit. General William Westmoreland stares at the casualty reports. It's late 1967. He's in his office at MACV headquarters in Saigon. The numbers should make him happy. Enemy body count for the month, 4,284. American dead, 476. Kill ratio, 9-1. By every metric that matters in conventional warfare, America is winning. Time magazine named him its 1965 Man of the Year. He's been given everything he asked for. 500,000 American troops, unlimited air support, billions in equipment, and he's using it exactly as he was trained. Westmoreland decided on a war of attrition, one in which the enemy body count was the key measure of merit, and search and destroy was the dominant tactical approach. Essentially, Westmoreland reasoned that U.S. superiority in warfare technology and resources would eliminate more bodies than the North could replace. The math was simple. Kill enough of them, and they'll run out of soldiers. Kill enough of them, and they'll quit. Kill enough of them, and America wins. According to historian Christian Appy, search and destroy was the principal tactic, and the enemy body count was the primary measure of progress in General William Westmoreland's war of attrition. But there was a problem with Westmoreland's equation, a fatal flaw that nobody in Washington wanted to acknowledge. The enemy could do math too. Infiltration increased from 1,800 soldiers in 1959 to 12,000 in 1964 to over 80,000 in 1968. After 8 years of bombing, after billions of dollars spent trying to cut the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the CIA estimated that only one North Vietnamese soldier died for every 100 bombs dropped. For every body Westmoreland counted, Hanoi sent 2 more south. For every division he destroyed, they rebuilt it. For every kill ratio he celebrated, They calculated how many losses they could afford. His war of attrition, search and destroy tactics, and emphasis on body count did nothing to affect the war in the hamlets and villages of South Vietnam, where the enemy's covert infrastructure was left free to continue using coercion and terror to dominate the rural populace. Because Westmoreland was fighting the wrong war. He decided to conduct a war of attrition, using search and destroy tactics, in which the measure of merit was body count. The premise was that, if he could kill enough of the enemy, they would lose heart and cease their aggression against the South Vietnamese. But he underestimated the enemy's staying power, maintaining that if he could inflict enough casualties, the communists would lose heart and cease their aggression against South Vietnam. Instead, the enemy proved willing to absorb horrifying losses and keep fighting. The high enemy casualty numbers failed because the North Vietnamese willingness to accept casualties far exceeded Westmoreland's comprehension. This wasn't miscalculation. It was cultural blindness. Westmoreland looked at casualty reports and saw numbers. The North Vietnamese looked at the same reports and saw an acceptable price. One North Vietnamese soldier counted 24 ways you could die on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Malaria and dysentery could ravage you. U.S. aerial bombardments could disintegrate you. Tigers could eat you. Snakes could poison you. Floods and landslides could wash you away. They walked it anyway. Millions of them. Between 1959 and 1975, an estimated 2 million soldiers and laborers from the communist North traversed the trail. Because they weren't fighting for territory or political advantage. They were fighting for survival, for identity, for the idea that their country belonged to them, not to foreigners, not to puppets in Saigon, not to anyone else. And you can't kill an idea with body counts. The enemy did not lose heart, did not cease aggression. Instead, he simply sent more and more replacements to make up his losses. Westmoreland's first resort in claiming progress in the war was always body count, but in fact this was meaningless. All the enemy's losses were quickly made up. Meaningless. That's the word that should haunt every discussion of Vietnam. Because while Westmoreland was stacking bodies like cordwood, the Viet Cong were doing something he never accounted for. They were waiting, Lieutenant Colonel James Wilbanks revealed. The problem with the war are the metrics. It is a situation where if you can't count what's important, you make what you can count important. So in this particular case, what you could count was dead enemy bodies. But what couldn't be counted? The village elder who smiled at American patrols during the day and hid weapons at night. The farmer who planted rice and landmines in the same field. The teenager who carried ammunition down the Ho Chi Minh Trail for 6 months and returned to find his entire family dead from B-52 strikes and picked up a rifle. The infrastructure, the support, the will, those don't show up in body counts. And the body counts themselves? A survey found that 61% of officers believed that the body count was often inflated. Typical comments by the respondents were that it was a fake, totally worthless, that the immensity of the false reporting is a blot on the honor of the army. The pressure to produce numbers corrupted everything. Because it was difficult to tell the difference between an enemy combatant and a friendly civilian, U.S. servicemen were sometimes less than positive about differentiating who was friendly or not. MACV wanted results, and since body count was the only way, they needed bodies. So bodies were what they got. If it's dead in Vietnamese, it's VC. That was the rule. Village massacres got counted as combat victories. Civilians became statistics. And every false report went up the chain to Westmoreland's office, where it became evidence of progress. But even if the numbers had been accurate, even if every body counted was a genuine enemy fighter, it wouldn't have mattered. Because the fundamental logic of the American approach ignored what the North Vietnamese had mastered. A textbook war of maneuver, focusing on initiative, tempo, surprise, and cultivated asymmetry at every level of warfare. The Viet Cong didn't fight when America wanted them to fight. They fought when they chose to. The enemy was able to exercise control over his losses by choosing when not to engage with the Americans. American patrols would sweep through an area, find nothing, declare it cleared, leave, and the Viet Cong would emerge from tunnels, from caches, from villages that had seemed empty, and retake everything. Hackworth explained. You could expect that any dry surface was mined and booby-trapped, and 60% of all the casualties we had in Vietnam came from mines and booby traps laid, I might add, by those local guerrillas who the generals at the top didn't count. Didn't count. There's that phrase again. The guerrillas who planted the traps, who controlled the villages, who made it impossible for American forces to hold ground without bleeding for it, they didn't count in Westmoreland's metrics. Because they weren't main force units, weren't regular NVA, couldn't be engaged in set-piece battles where American firepower could destroy them. They were just farmers, just villagers, just people who happened to hate the Americans enough to plant mines that killed 60% of U.S. casualties. General Westmoreland's strategy of attrition failed because it reduced security across the countryside, ostracized the people within South Vietnam, and did not affect the South Vietnamese communists. Think about what that means. 500,000 American troops couldn't secure the countryside, couldn't protect the villages, couldn't stop farmers from planting booby traps, because protection required presence, and presence required holding ground. And holding ground meant static defenses, which meant firebases, which meant targets for sapper attacks, which meant more casualties. The war became a treadmill. Westmoreland was on a treadmill. The progress, he claimed in racking up huge body counts, did nothing to win the war. The enemy simply kept sending more and more replacements to make up his losses. And the supply line feeding those replacements? Despite U.S. anti-infiltration efforts, the estimated number of PAVN infiltrators for 1966 was between 58,000 and 90,000 troops, including 5 full enemy regiments. A June 1966 DJ estimate credited the North Vietnamese with 1,000 kilometers of passable roads within the corridor, at least 300 kilometers of which were good enough for year-round use. America bombed that trail for 8 years, dropped millions of tons of ordnance. The United States seeded clouds to induce rain and floods, launched laser-guided bombs to create choke points and trap truck convoys, and parachuted sensors that burrowed into the ground like bamboo sprouts. Nothing worked. After each aerial attack, hordes of soldiers and volunteers scurried to repair the damage, filling craters, creating bypasses, and deliberately building crude bridges just beneath the surface of river water to avoid aerial detection. Although the NVA experienced significant losses in these operations, the U.S. Armed Forces were unable to disrupt the enemy's supply line. Because for every road America destroyed, North Vietnam built 3 more. For every bridge bombed, they constructed underwater crossings. For every choke point created, they carved new paths through the jungle. By 1961, U.S. intelligence estimated that more than 5,000 insurgents were reaching South Vietnam annually using the route. By 1968, that number had grown to 80,000. U.S. intelligence estimates calculated the throughput infiltration rate of North Vietnamese truck movements as ranging from a minimum of 100 short tons per day to a high of 400 short tons per day, more than sufficient to supply communist efforts in South Vietnam throughout the war. 100 tons per day. Minimum. Flowing south through a trail network that wasn't a single road, but rather a honeycomb of routes totaling about 12,000 miles. And maintaining that system? In 1970, an estimated 67,000 North Vietnamese military personnel served in Laos. In 1968, when only 40,000 NVA were reported in Laos, some 25,000 of them were thought to operate the infiltration system over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Tens of thousands of engineers, laborers, security forces, all dedicated to keeping that supply line open, all willing to die doing it. Casualties caused by American airstrikes were low, accounting for only 2% of total losses on the trail. Disease, exhaustion, accidents killed more men than bombs. But they kept walking, kept building, kept repairing, because they understood something America didn't. This wasn't about winning battles. It was about not losing, about outlasting, about making the cost of American presence so high, so constant, so unending that eventually America would leave. And they were right. General William Depew, Westmoreland's close associate, later admitted, "We ended up with no operational plan that had the slightest chance of ending the war favorably. No chance." Those are devastating words from one of the architects of the strategy. He overestimated the American people's patience and tolerance of friendly losses. Every week, CBS Evening News showed the body count. American dead, 217. Enemy dead, 1,843. Victory, right? Except Americans saw those 217 flag-draped coffins coming home, saw their neighbors' sons in wheelchairs, saw boys who'd gone to Vietnam at 19 come back at 20 with 1,000-yard stares and heroin habits. And they started asking the question Westmoreland never answered. What are we winning? Not territory. We weren't trying to conquer North Vietnam. Not hearts and minds. The South Vietnamese government was corrupt, unpopular, propped up by American money and guns. Not security. Saigon itself was attacked during Tet. The American embassy was overrun. So what exactly were those 58,000 American lives buying? The answer came in 1968. January 30th, Tet Offensive. The surprise attacks by North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces on dozens of towns, cities, airfields, and military bases, including Westmoreland's headquarters and the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, shocked the American public. Although the offensive was an unqualified failure from a strictly military standpoint, news and images of the attacks completely undermined the assurances by Johnson and Westmoreland that the war was being won. Military failure. Political victory. The Viet Cong lost 50,000 men in Tet, destroyed entire battalions. By Westmoreland's metrics, it was the biggest American victory of the war. And it lost him the war. Because Americans watched enemy fighters inside the U.S. Embassy compound. Watched cities they'd been told were secure burning on television. Watched Westmoreland stand in front of cameras and claim progress while Saigon burned behind him. And they stopped believing. In the wake of the attacks, Westmoreland was sent home to become Army Chief of Staff. He'd asked for 206,000 more troops. President Johnson refused. Instead of reinforcements, Westmoreland got a promotion that ended his career. The war continued for 7 more years. But it was over. Everyone knew it. The United States, unable to amount debilitating losses on the enemy and its supply lines, withdrew all troops by March 29, 1973. And 2 years later, North Vietnamese tanks rolled into Saigon. The war Westmoreland said America was winning ended with helicopters evacuating the last Americans from the embassy roof, while South Vietnamese allies clawed at the gates, begging to be saved. The kill ratio that day was infinite. 0 Americans died, and South Vietnam ceased to exist. So what happened? How did the most powerful military in history lose to an enemy that fought with bamboo spikes and stolen ammunition? How did 500,000 American troops, unlimited air support, and every technological advantage fail to defeat guerrillas in rubber sandals? The answer is brutal in its simplicity. America was fighting a conventional war with body counts and kill ratios. North Vietnam was fighting a people's war with patience and will. America needed to win. North Vietnam just needed to not lose. And there's no metric for that. No way to count it. No strategy to defeat it. Because guerrilla warfare isn't about battles. It's about making every day cost more than the enemy is willing to pay. It's about turning the enemy's strength into weakness, their firepower into collateral damage, their technology into frustration, their presence into the recruiting tool that keeps resistance alive. The Viet Cong didn't defeat the American military. They made the American people decide the war wasn't worth fighting. The fundamental issue wasn't that Westmoreland had inaccurate information about enemy forces being destroyed. What appears dramatically off in Westmoreland's understanding of the equation is that the U.S. military vastly underestimated the casualties the enemy was prepared to take, as well as the degree of control the enemy was able to exercise over his losses by choosing when not to engage. They chose the battlefield. They chose the timing. They chose when to fight and when to fade into the jungle. They chose to accept horrifying casualties because they were fighting for their country, and America was fighting for abstractions like containment theory and domino effects. You can't defeat that with body counts. You can't bomb that into submission. You can't kill enough people to make them stop caring. The Pentagon learned that lesson in Vietnam, then forgot it in Iraq, then relearned it in Afghanistan. Then we'll probably forget it again the next time someone decides that superior firepower can defeat an idea. Because the lesson is uncomfortable. The lesson is that sometimes the most powerful military in the world can do everything right tactically and still lose strategically, can win every battle and lose the war, can count every body and miss the point. Westmoreland's body counts were meaningless. The tunnels couldn't be cleared. The booby traps couldn't be stopped. The sappers couldn't be prevented. The Ho Chi Minh Trail couldn't be cut. The villages couldn't be secured. The will couldn't be broken. And 58,000 Americans died learning what the Vietnamese already knew. That in a guerrilla war, the side that can't afford to quit will always defeat the side that can.